I would like to sincerely thank the Anzac Regional Council, along with the Regional Arts Development Fund, for their support in bringing you this interview. The Regional Arts Development Fund is a partnership between the Queensland Government and Anzac Regional Council to support local arts and culture in regional Queensland. I don't think there would be one Australian or New Zealand person who isn't moved when they hear the last post being played. This Anzac Day, I wanted to take the opportunity to honour all returned soldiers and those still serving. Tim Hibberd served in Afghanistan and kindly sat down with me to share his experience. To all our Defence Forces, past and present, with my deepest respect, thank you for all you do for our country and others in our time and their time of need. Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I just want to find out firstly, because we're going to talk about Anzac Day, but what motivated you in the first place to join the Australian Defence Force? Because you're really putting, these days that you're more than likely going to put your life on the line. And
for me, it wasn't really a bridge to cross mentally to get across that line. It was very much in line with the lifestyle that I was living, particularly as a young guy, very outdoors, hunting, camping, fishing, motorbikes, forward driving, all that sort of about. So the concept of doing that professionally and then potentially, the risks associated with deployments obviously weren't really forefront of mind. It wasn't really a concern in any way, shape or form, I guess. I don't know why. I mean, there are plenty of risks in doing that recreationally, probably more so you could argue than doing it through defence. But yeah, that was very, very easy transition for me.
Yeah. And now you were a drone technician, weren't you?
Yeah, so I did 20 years, primarily as an aircraft technician, so finishing up as a aircraft maintenance manager. So in the civilian world, that would be like a LAMI equivalent that manages and releases all the aircraft to the aircrew. In the UAS or drone business within defence, maintained and operated 4 different types of drones and deployed in 2009 for 6 months as a operator and maintainer. So I got to see a whole gamut.
So where were you deployed to, Tim, in 2009?
So our base was in Tarankout in Afghanistan. However, I personally spent almost half of my deployment out in patrol bases with troops on the ground. So the way we would operate our drones is we would launch them from the base within Tarankout and then fly them forward to where the troops on the ground were operating, and then would hand it over to one of our operators on the ground who had a control station with a short range transmitter so that it could control it locally, and you could communicate personally with the troop commanders on the ground and meet their needs immediately. So just shorten that communications loop, I guess.
Yeah. And did you do all your training through the Defence Force?
As an aircraft technician and drone?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So prior to enlisting in the Army, I was a carpenter, working in the construction industry in around Brisbane, and then decided for one reason or another that as much as I enjoyed the job, the industry wasn't, it's a very cutthroat industry, and was looking for a change and decided that I was going to step into the aircraft maintenance world.
Tim, how confronting was it for you when you first went to Afghanistan, and do you get used to that, what you're going through over there?
Confronting, it's you sort of step off the plane and you're wide-eyed, and there's a lot to take in, and it's a very steep learning curve, getting into country, getting into what we call a battle rhythm. And the operational tempo for us was very high. We were pretty much operating 12-hour days for 10 days straight, and then take one day off. So it was very full-on experience initially, but you hit it, that rhythm, and you get into a bit of a tempo that you get used to very quickly. The operational side of it, you because you are so busy and adjusting so quickly and taking so much in, you tend not to sort of take that much notice of, the risks that are associated with that, I guess. It's just, you sort of take everything in your stride. It's just part of what you're doing day in, day out.
And Tim, like when you get off the plane over there, and where do they, like the camps, I imagine, are all set up, and that must be an enormous thing for the Army, for the Defence Forces to set up a mini city, or a portable city, I suppose. Yeah,
so we were accommodated when we were in Tarin, essentially armoured shipping containers. So there's like 4 of us to a 40-foot shipping container, essentially. So that was an experience within itself. So all the containers were all lined up side by side, and then like opposite as well. So there's a big corridor down the middle, and you had to sort of get used to coming and going quietly and getting dressed in the dark, because whenever you're starting shift, someone's off shift. Not slamming doors as you're coming and going, because that doesn't make you very popular when you're ruining someone's precious downtime. One of the most impressive things for me was during my time in Afghanistan was seeing the logistics tsunami of when the US took over from the Dutch in Oruzgan province. So we would literally go to work in the morning, and there'd be pretty much just bare dirt. And by the time you were coming home, there'd be a 3-story high-rise apartment of these containers set up, where the Americans had just literally brought so much equipment with them in such a short space of time. It was just phenomenal to see, and quite frankly, very, very impressive. That was one of the things that they do exceptionally well, is their logistics support and the amount of equipment they can bring to bear very quickly. It was an amazing experience.
It's just incredible to think that, all that, so much large equipment too can be taken into a country like that. It just, I find that fascinating. Yeah,
a lot of it's flown in, but the Americans have a lot of heavy lift aircraft, a lot more heavy lift aircraft than we do. But even still, a lot, the majority of it would come overland through Pakistan. So that in and of itself has its own inherent risks of going across quite perilous country for a long, long distance.
And Tim, do you kind of work together with those other countries, or do you have your own own things happening?
Absolutely. So, like, we all work within our own chain of commands, but each country works together as a coalition. So we obviously answer to our own commanders, and they answer to theirs. But at the headquarters level, it's all intermeshed and intertwined. So initially, we were our headquarters, or the drone headquarters, was co-located with the Dutch UAV headquarters. So they would share information back and forwards, literally watching side by side on 2 different screens, 2 different feeds from different aircraft from different countries. And as the Americans took over, the same thing occurred, and there were challenges in setting up communication systems that were compatible, which we overcame. But yeah, in terms of working together, the assets, being the aircraft and the drones, they're all tasked on a needs basis in terms of priority, not on whose country they come from.
It must just, I can't imagine what coordination it takes for you all to work in together. And, I often think of even the little, we were talking about the camps and what gets taken over there. But when you think, there's doctors and there has to be cooks and you have to get food in, and, it's just enormous that, the basics that you have to consider when you go to a country like that or,
Yes.
or are deployed anywhere.
Yeah, so TK had a what they call a Role 3 medical facility, which is essentially a field hospital. So we had literally everything from a full surgical team there the whole time that I was there. Medics, nurses, dentists, the whole gamut.
That's incredible. Tim, you were saying before about how you had to be really considerate. That must make you a really good husband when you come back, I think, to be considerate, not slam doors.
Debatable. You'd have to ask Jen about that. But you'd like to think so, that you do get into that sort of habit. Some of the habits that pick up are quite good, and then there are things that you bring back that are that aren't don't mesh that well within civilian society. So there's good and bad sides of both.
How do you make the transition back?
So people, you've often spoken about PTSD, and there's a lot of misnomers and connotations associated with that. I think there's probably two sides or two facets to that. There's the loss of a sense of purpose and meaning when you come back from an operational deployment like that, where guys who are literally dealing with life and death situations on a daily basis, and that sense of urgency and real need and purpose all of a sudden gets taken away from them, and you always see it portrayed in the movies where they come back from a deployment and they're walking around a shopping centre, and the video is just sort of greyed out a little bit to sort of give that depiction of it sort of lost the richness of colour and meaning. And I experienced that myself to a degree. Like, it's very hard to relate to P&C meetings and how important, trying to relate to how important or real that is compared to dealing with fighting for someone's life a couple of weeks ago. It does seem to have a lack of meaning or urgency, I guess, or sense of reality to it. So there's that sort of, some guys really struggle to find that meaning and purpose when they get back, and sort of end up in some real internal pain and cycle through depression. And then there's the side of PTSD, which is essentially bringing back behaviours that are ingrained and instilled through being exposed to unnatural and unusual scenarios, high stress situations, and not being able to let go of those instinctive and natural responses. And it is a natural response to an unnatural situation. So I can give you an example of that I personally experienced. So one of the requirements of my job as a UAS mission commander or shift commander was, when I was on a shift, if we had indirect fire, so the enemy were firing missiles and rockets into the base, I'd be required to put on all my body armour and helmet and go up onto the deck that I built up on our roof and try and identify where the direction that they were coming from, and then get our UAV operators to fly the aircraft out to try and identify any people on the ground and track their movements if at all possible. So being exposed, to these rockets and missiles coming in. Occasionally they'd get close and you would actually feel a pressure wave wash over you if they were close enough. One of the real things that sort of was a bit of a trigger for me when I first got back was fireworks. So some large fireworks, you'd sort of feel that pressure wave hit you. And then I had a couple of situations on New Year's after I got back where I literally just had to leave the fireworks because I wasn't coping that well with it, and it was triggering some responses in me initially. And as I said, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm gonna actually go. But yeah, and that was, for me, there was a gradual transition out of that mindset. Some people do it better than others. Some people struggle to do it at all and never get out of that deployment mindset. So, I mean, I guess that's how I see it from my perspective, and everyone has their own experience, and no two experiences are the same. You can have, two people standing side by side and experience the exact same scenario, and one person won't even skip a beat and just roll on and not even notice it, and the other person will be traumatized for life. It's just how everyone's wired differently, and you've got to respect that.
How many times would that have happened to you, Tim, over there that you were fired upon in the camps?
Probably every 3 or 4 days.
Oh my gosh.
So through that period, there was they ended up trying to hunt this guy who they knew they had intelligence to support the fact that this guy was an Uzbeki rocketeer or artillery person, and he was very effective in placing rockets around the Tarankout bowl, they call it, which was like the mountain range around Tarankout, and then targeting essentially the aircraft flight line to try and destroy coalition aircraft. And he just bracketed it with each salvo, or each time he set up, he brought that bracket tighter and tighter and was getting more and more accurate, which is how they knew that there was someone who actually knew what they were doing, was conducting these operations. So that was a very intense period for about 2 months, where, like I said, every 3 or 4 nights, the rockets had come in series of 3 to 7 rockets per night.
And Tim, when you get to come home, do you feel a certain sense of responsibility that, from your perspective, that you want to stay, or are you more than ready to let that go and come back?
Yeah, good question. There's a bit of a duality, actually. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. Everyone, by the time their deployment is up, is generally physically and mentally exhausted. I know I was. 12-hour days for 6 months straight was physically and mentally exhausting. But having said that, no one wants to be the guy that quits on the team. And one of the good things about my job was that I got to see a lot of Afghanistan through the lens of a camera. Not so much as the guys out on patrol on foot, but I also got to see a lot of the good work that was done by our engineers in building schools for girls, bridges, connecting the communities. And that was essentially what I took away as being our mission over there, was trying to stand up a country. And I took a great deal of pride in what we achieved over there. So when you sort of are leaving that, it's like I said, it's a very much a double-edged sword. You want to come home and you want to see your family, and you want to take a break, but at the same time, you still want to be part of that team, and there is that drive to want to go back. And once again, it's portrayed as a bit of a cliche in movies where guys seemingly for reasons that no one else can get their head around as to why someone would want to go back to an operational deployment and put themselves in danger repeatedly. But there's very much a lot of pride and enjoyment in delivering those outcomes for me. It was for the local population as well.
And Tim, you were talking about PTSD. What sort of support is there for you when you get home? And are your families given some training in how they can best support you as well?
Yeah, but another very good question. So there are a lot of support mechanisms within Defence. Is it up to the task? I mean, the calls for a Royal Commission would say no. Once again, it's a double-edged sword. So it's not that the systems and mechanisms and policies aren't in place, because they actually are. But there's a lot of onus on members to self-report. And then if they do, then they're not going to likely be deployed again. So it's a very challenging situation to put people in, to sort of say, and do you have any issues? And then say, well, if you would say yes, then that's it. You're pretty much not going to be deploying again for at least a significant period of time. So it's somewhat of a disincentive to self-report, as much as those that actually do get the support that they need. The onus is essentially on the member. As for families, there's definitely resources out there. So the DCO, or Defence Community Organisation, offers a lot of support to, family members and spouses, to sort of give them the information, the tools to be able to communicate to their partner and understand their transition, because it is a huge shift when you're coming back. Your family's learnt to do everything without your input, and all of a sudden that void's grown over, and now you're trying to force yourself back into a family unit that's functioned quite fine without you for the most part for the last 6 months, and it can be quite challenging. But there are some resources out there, and they've gotten better over years. I would definitely add that. There's, by all means, a long way to go to make it a foolproof system, but no, I support the mechanisms out there. There's definitely advocates, particularly within the RSL and DCO, that can support members and their families quite well.
I actually hadn't considered that, and I know, trying to come back into the family unit. I even know when Barry's been away here for a couple of weeks, and you get used to doing all the jobs and that, and then he comes back and there's a little transition period, I suppose, when he comes back, and he hasn't been gone for very long, and so I hadn't actually even thought of that, Tim. How that affects your families when you come back. Yeah,
there's a lot of things going on, like for everyone involved. It's not just the member, them returning. It's the whole family group and the community around them, the extended family, everyone that's involved is affected in some way, shape or form.
So, Tim, getting back to Anzac Day. So there's so much history around Anzac Day, and it dates back to the very First World War. And so what, for you as a soldier, does Anzac Day mean to you in the 21st century?
there's a lot going on for return service members. For me personally, it's a big day. So for your listeners that aren't familiar with the significance of, I'll give you an example of like the last post, which is the tune played on the bugle at the cenotaph during the service. So they have historically various bugle calls throughout the day to break the day up, and it started in the morning with reveille to wake the soldiers, and last post was played historically when the last guard post had been inspected and was secure for the night, be it either in barracks or the encampment. The duty officer had inspected and everything had been secured, and the place had been locked down for the night. Where that came into significance in terms of a ceremonial or a remembrance perspective was during World War One. So they used to, once again, because soldiers didn't have wristwatches, used to play the bugle calls out on the front as well. So last post was played at the end of the day's conflict, and that would signify to guys who had been separated from their unit or their group to make their way back to their parent unit and back to their platoon or section. Mm-hmm. That was typically when they would first discover that their teammates or their members of their unit had been lost in battle. So that was that musical accompaniment was associated with that sense of loss. So that's why last post is played. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit emotional just thinking about it. So I always shed a tear during last post. So for me, last post has a set of concentric circles. Like I play during the playing of last post, you sort of think about those who have made the sacrifice that you know personally, that you've lost, that are close to you. And then for me, I think take the time to think about those who didn't come home during my deployment. And then with those that didn't come home throughout the Afghanistan campaign, and then broadly across all campaigns throughout Australia's history. And like I said, I always shed a tear during the last post. It's not even an option, unfortunately. It's a bit embarrassing, but so the last post is played, and then there'll be a minute's silence, and then they'll play Rouse, which is essentially calling the spirits home to heaven. So that's the significance for me of the service itself. More broadly, the Anzac Day as a whole presents an opportunity for soldiers to come together that, like myself, have left the army or left the service, to come back together and do a bit of a welfare check with each other and catch up and just check up on the boys. Because some people aren't as fortunate as others. Some people, like myself, adjust reasonably well, and some not so much. And everyone has busy lives that they lead, and it's just one of those days where you get to bring everyone back in and check up on them, have a few beers and catch up.
Tim, do they have a bugler in these current campaigns? Is there someone that plays the last post when you're away? Or does it just depend?
So harking back to my recruit training days, they used to play the bugle over the PA system. So you'd be woken up in the morning by reveille and you'd go to bed at 10 o'clock at night to last post. But in terms of on deployment, no. The only thing coming through the PA, unfortunately, was the call to prayer, which is the Afghanis, and they had their own mosque right next to where our operations post was. So that, yeah. But in terms of the bugle, no, there's nothing played, unfortunately. But it's also, I guess that would partly be due to the fact that it was a multinational campaign, not just an Australian campaign as well.
Tim, I don't think there's anyone in Australia who doesn't get goosebumps hearing that last post. And it's, oh gosh, even though we don't know, you know, we can't imagine what you will go through over there when you're away. We have a little bit of understanding, and I really appreciate your insight today. And, you know, I just have the deepest respect for all of you that go and fight for our country. I thank you so much for everything you do, and maybe one day we'll see a world where there's peace and there won't be a need for battleships and drones in a war situation. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching our video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please try to remember to just click on the subscribe button so we can keep you updated with everything that's happening. Thank you.